User profiles. In this nugget, we're going to continue our discussion of user accounts, and we'll also take a look at profiles within those user accounts. We start off with looking at how to modify multiple accounts through the graphical user interface, and we'll see the different kinds of things you can do there. We'll also look at adding UPN suffixes if you want to change the user's user principal name and how they log on. We'll take a look at user profiles, which remember is a collection of folders, files, registry settings that identify and uniquely provide the user's desktop settings in their environment. We'll take a look at local user profiles, and then we'll take a look at how to configure those local user profiles for default user profiles. Then we'll look at pre-configured group profiles so that you can set things up such that a series of user accounts all use the same profile. And a problem with that is one of the user accounts could change that profile. So we'll also take a look at how to make a profile a mandatory user profile. You'll recall from our last nugget that we are exploring ways in which we can work with multiple user accounts at once. We can either create multiple accounts using dsadd, we can modify multiple accounts using just dsmod or dsquery and then dsmod, and we show you some spreadsheets that you can use to automate all those functions. However, sometimes it's still kind of handy if you already happen to be at Active Directory Users and Computers, which is on the Start menu under Administrative Tools, and then Active Directory Users and Computers. As long as you're already here, if you want to go ahead and make multiple changes, you can do that to certain things as well. You can't do it for all functions, but I will show you some of the things you can do. By the way, as I go through this, I recommend that you pause the screen from time to time to look at an interface, just so you have some time to look it over, and so that you can get a good idea of the different things you can do. And I'll explain them as well, but I would suggest that you know those because Microsoft, I think, expects administrators to know exactly what you can do when you can right-click, exactly what properties appear when you click on properties, so that you can know what kinds of things you can change when you select multiple users. So anyway, in this case, I simply used click the first account, held down shift, click the last account. Let's say I want these first 10. And maybe we want to make a change to these 10 accounts at once. Maybe we want to add them to a group. Maybe they all got promoted to management. Well, I can click on add to a group here, and then if I've got a managers group or something like that, just type managers, something like that, or Phoenix managers or whatever. Then I just click OK, and voila, they're all members of that group now. Other things I could do is to right-click and say disable account. Hey, we've decided to get rid of all our middle management, so thanks for the promotion, but unfortunately you've also been laid off. So we'll disable their accounts. Well, sorry about that, guys. That wasn't very nice, was it? All right, so now that they're all disabled, we have a big contract vote, and we realize, you know what, we need these people after all. Middle management is important as well, right? So we go back and we enable their account. You can do all of those kinds of things as well. And then once you can done all that, you can also choose the traditional move item that we've always had with Windows 2000 as well. If you're new to Windows, then you might realize that in Windows NT4, we didn't really have this same exact equivalent. In Windows 2000, you had to click this move item, and then you'd select a different organizational unit to move them to. For example, maybe you wanted to move them into Tucson, then you'd click OK. Now, one of the frustrations we had in Windows 2000 was that you couldn't just take this whole glob of users and just drag them across to Tucson if you wanted to move them there. Well, a lot of admins really complained about that, and I think Microsoft heard our loud and onerous complaints there, and so they finally succumbed to the pressure and allowed us now to move them. So you can now just click and drag, and we can just move everybody over to Tucson. Go to Tucson here, and we see that we've got all 10 user accounts. Then I can just as easily drag them back to Phoenix where I actually want them. Now, another thing we can do here is if we select multiple accounts, when I right-click on these, of course, you see that I can send mail as well as to cut and paste on the other side of that, and then delete as well. But I can also go to Properties, which is another new function that you need to be aware of. And here we need to make sure that you're familiar with some of the things that you can look at here, and I would just get a kind of mind's eye view of what these dialog boxes look like. For example, I can change the description to say these are all middle managers or something like that. And that would change the description for all of them. I could change the office to, you know, they're the Phoenix office, all that kind of thing. Telephone number, fax, email, all that kind of stuff. Now the email one seems less practical because you don't typically have everyone with the same email address, but certainly it's possible if they have kind of a catch-all email address, you could enter that in. Then we could also go in here to the account item, and we can change their UPN suffix. Now you can have multiple UPN suffixes. Now let's say, for example, that my users in Phoenix are a little bit lazy and they don't like to type in @nuggetlab.com. They just want to type in @phx.com for Phoenix, So we could set up a different UPN suffix for them. So it might be useful if especially you have long domains here and you have parent-child domains where you have westcoast.phoenix.research.nuggetlab.com. That's a long UPN suffix, and so you could just shorten that if you wanted to. Or you could lengthen it into a longer address if you needed to be more specific for that UPN suffix. But the way you'll do that is by adding more UPN suffixes, by going to Administrative Tools, and then going to Active Directory Domains and Trusts. And from here, we'll select the root of Active Directory Domains and Trusts, and right-click and choose Properties. From here, we'll just enter in alternative UPN suffixes. Maybe I just want phx.com. Then I'll click on Add over here, and there we have it. Then I click OK and close this. And that's really all there is to it. So that's pretty easy. Now, here I don't think it's going to show up because I created that after I opened this dialog box. So I'll have to cancel out of this and come back, and then we'll be able to go back to its properties. And now when we go to the account here, we'll see that I can change the UPN suffix to phx.com. And I don't have to change phx.com on multiple objects like I'm doing here. I can do it on individual accounts, of course, as well if I want. Then we can go to the logon hours. Here I can just change the logon hours for all these users if I want. It would change it for all the selected users, any computer restrictions if I only wanted to log on to certain accounts, and all the rest of the items that you see here. And I'll just scroll down through here. I've already explained what each one of these items are, but you see the various ones that are available. And then again, you can set up an account expires option here as well. And then you see here we can also go to the address and change the address, and that all explains itself pretty well. Of course, you have to, for any of these things I've shown you, have to check the item first in order for it to be visible so you can type in there. Same with the profile, path, home folder, all that kind of thing. If I have a new home directory, or rather a new server that's going to have more home directories on it so that I can distribute my load between two servers, for example, it might be handy to select these users and redirect them to that other home folder, or the same thing for a profile path, for example. And then for my organization, again, these things all explain themselves pretty well as well. Now then, we've alluded to user profiles a few times in the past couple of nuggets here, so let's go ahead and get into some more detail about what that really is. The user profile contains the user's choice of desktop wallpaper, mouse pointers, color schemes, screensavers, any shortcuts on the desktop, any files they have on the desktop. All of those user configuration settings, including registry settings specific to that user account, are going to be contained in the user profile. Also, there are application settings that can be unique to each user profile as well, such as Microsoft Word, which might have a custom dictionary or custom toolbars or any of those kinds of things, can also be configured in a custom user profile or in anybody's user profile. And this is the same on Windows XP as it is on Windows 2000, Windows Server 2003. It stores the user's profiles locally on the hard disk under the system drive. And then in this case, it would be under Documents and Settings. That's the default behavior. If you've upgraded a machine from a previous versions of Windows, it might be under a folder that says Profiles, or it might be under Windows Profiles more likely. For example, if it was from Windows NT 4 that's been upgraded. In any case, for new installations of 2000 and later, it'll be under Documents and Settings. And here we have profiles for everyone that's ever logged on to this computer. Now, what's of note here is that when you use just local profiles, and I'll address roaming profiles here shortly, but when you use local profiles, the first time a user logs on, for example, my trainer account here, the first time I logged on using whatever was configured in the default user settings profile here, which is a hidden folder. And that's the case with everybody who logs on, and again, it applies to 2000 XP and 2003. Now, after I've successfully logged on once, and it's created this local profile for me, subsequent logons will just use this only this one profile. Now, there's another profile that's used in conjunction with this, and that is the All Users profile, which contains certain things on the Start menu, for example, that are going to be common to all users. And you may also have applications that get stored in the All Users profile. Not actually applications themselves, but desktop shortcuts and things like this that get stored in the All Users profile. And in fact, let's go ahead and double-click on the All Users profile, and we'll see that indeed on the Start menu, for example, it has these default icons up at the top after I've installed Microsoft Office, as well as these two that are there by default on any Windows Server 2003 or XP system. And if I click on Start in All Programs, sure enough, I see all these icons up at the top, and that's only because they do appear on the All Users Start menu. And this is handy to know because if I don't want all my users to have all of these items, then I could just remove any of these items from here, and then any users that log on, let's say I don't want these new Office and Open Office document items. Now when I click on Start All Programs, of course they disappear from my own local profile, but really they disappeared from the All Users profile, and anyone else who logs on will also have those icons absent. And then, of course, I can make any other changes to the rest of the profile here as necessary, but that would only affect the local computer. So that if I had specific settings I wanted for one single computer, for anybody that logged onto that machine, I could, of course, change the all-users profile. What else could I do, however, to customize those settings according to, like, a company standard or something like this? Well, for that, let's go ahead and take a look again at Remote Desktop, where I'm going to connect to a Windows XP computer, where I've got a user logged on as Phoenix User 01. And once this loads up, we see that we have the Windows XP default profile here. And so now here at the Windows XP desktop, we see the default verdant green meadow that gives us peaceful thoughts of world harmony, and we see our start menu with the Fisher-Price color scheme on it, and all of this. So that's just the kind of thing you've probably been used to seeing on Windows XP. But let's say that this might not apply to our corporate standard. No, in this corporation, we don't like verdant green meadows. Instead, we want to go to something else. So here in Phoenix, maybe we have the fantasy of actually seeing autumn leaves, because we don't see this kind of a scene very often. So in the Phoenix office, they're giving us this kind of a view. Then we got our default start menu where you got the Fisher-Price colors and all that kind of thing going on here. Now let's just go ahead and reconfigure the remainder of this profile and a few other settings so that we can just get an idea for some of the kind of things you might see. For example, maybe on the desktop for all my users, I want them to have a WordPad document that has our acceptable use policy. So we'll just name this document the acceptable use policy, and that's what a lot of corporations use for the users to read, and they have to often assign an agreement for it, stating that they will only use the computers for company use. They will not use it to go to inappropriate websites or to give away company secrets or anything like that. You know the document I'm talking about, the one your users have all memorized and cherish as if it was some kind of a holy document. Anyway, so we have this kind of thing on the desktop, and let's say we also have a shortcut on here. So we might have a new, and you can just do a shortcut wizard like I'm going to do real quick here. And then I'll just browse for a quick little shortcut here. In this case, we've got a shortcut, and it's in a folder called the Common Files folder, and this might just be a folder that all the users on this computer want to access, and it's just an ongoing projects document. It doesn't really mean anything. It's just for the purpose of creating this shortcut. So now we see we have a shortcut and a file here. Now the next thing I'm going to be able to do is let's just quickly make one other real quick changes so I can make sure we have enough stuff to keep track of here in the appearance item. We'll just go ahead and change the color scheme to the silver color scheme, and then what I'm going to do is to log off, and then I'll log back on as the trainer account. My purpose in doing that is because when I log back on as the trainer account here, I want to be able to demonstrate that we can go to that user's local settings for their profile. We want to see that the changes have been saved, and then we'll also show you how that you can copy those settings if you like those, and maybe you want those to be a company standard on this local computer, and you can copy those to the default user profile. So let's go ahead and reconnect now as the administrator, which is our trainer account. And as this profile loads, I'm just going to click on Start, My Computer, right-click here, and choose Explore to go into the file system for the local disk. And then as we go to Documents and Settings, we'll see that indeed I have Phoenix User 01 with any files in the Application Data folder which are relevant there that need files, such as certain settings for Outlook will be stored there, certain files there, any custom dictionaries, that kind of thing. Internet cookies, the desktop folder, which contains these two items that we looked at just a moment ago. And then we'll also see that we have internet favorites, local settings. That doesn't really have any relevance to us until we get into roaming profiles, but in short here, the local settings will keep local, just the way it looks, local certain files that we don't want to roam back and forth to a roaming user profile that gets copied up to a profile server somewhere. And that'll keep things off of there, such as temporary files, temporary internet files, which can be hundreds of megabytes even. So we'll have to conserve some bandwidth with that kind of thing. And then another pretty important item here, for example, would be the Start menu. And then the ntuser.dat file is the HKeyCurrentUser portion of the registry. If you go to a command line and you type regedit and press enter, this is actually what appears as HKeyCurrentUser, so that's your registry settings for the specific individual user. Now, let me also point out that, yes, this is a Windows Server 2003 course, and yet here I am logged on to a Windows XP computer. Why am I doing that? Well, that's because even as administrators managing servers, most of your profile administration really relates to desktop clients. I mean, you can set up profiles and customize them and so forth for servers, but most of the time that will be for your desktops. Plus, any of the profile configuration settings I make for any current Microsoft operating system really pretty much is the same all the way across the board. So this could be a Windows 2000 Professional or a server. This could be a Windows XP machine. This could be Windows Server 2003. The profile management is the same pretty much across the board. Now, assuming that we really like this profile and this user is our pet user, they're our ideal user, and they've configured their profile exactly according to company standards, then I could right-click on my computer and choose System Properties, where I am right now, and go to the Advanced tab in Settings. And my purpose for being here is to identify this profile that we have, and it shows it for us right here. By the way, you can't really see this over there, but it just tells you the last time it was modified. It gives you a date and a time there for when it was modified. Or actually just a date, I guess. Anyway, we'll take this profile, and we want to copy it to the default user profile so that any other new users that come along will get the exact same profile that this user got. So this is going to be the profile we'll use, and I'll copy it to the default user profile under Documents and Settings, and I'll select it here in the File System and OK, and then I'll choose Permitted to Use. I'll just give everyone permission, because that will apply to any new users that I have, and I don't have to specify individual accounts that way. When I click OK, it tells me that there's already a profile there. Do I want to override it? I'll say yes, because that's just the profile that was there when we first created or logged on and installed Windows XP here. Now, another thing to point out here is that this is a local profile. You might have seen in a previous nugget that I did give a roaming user profile directory for this user account. Offline here, I went back and just deleted that location in the user account profile settings, user account settings, so that we can keep these local, because that's our topic right now, is just local profiles. And in fact, let's go ahead and take a look at the Phoenix User 01 account for the profile folder, or profile tab there. And we see that indeed I have cleared that out, and I just want to show that to you for clarity's sake. Now here on Client 01, I have indeed logged on as another user, Phoenix User 03 in this case. And in this case, I've also cleared out their profile setting for the roaming profile. So we're just local on this account. Now, we do see that we have copied those settings from default user so that when this user logged on for the first time, they get the silver color scheme, which we see from the taskbar here and from the start menu. We also see that we have the document on the desktop, that we have the acceptable use policy, as well as the shortcut to ongoing projects. Now, one thing we don't see that you might have expected to see was that autumn wallpaper. But if I right-click on the desktop and choose Properties, this is just kind of a twitchy little thing. If I go to Desktop, notice that it is indeed the autumn setting there, but it's just not showing up for some reason. Doesn't matter. If I go to anything else, I go to, the stretch position. If I go to center and then go back to stretch the way it originally was, anything that activates the apply button, well, even though I haven't changed the actual desktop wallpaper, now that I click apply, it comes back up. And I'm only pointing this out to let you know that sometimes the desktop wallpaper is a little bit twitchy and does not really come across with the profile the way you might expect it to. But otherwise, we now see that this user has indeed inherited all the settings because it's been copied down from the default user profile. Now, once that's been done, this user can make any changes. They say, who these administrators are? What do they think they're doing giving me the autumn wallpaper? Everybody knows that it's much better if you choose a different wallpaper here and you go to this, azul setting right here. This is just exactly what Phoenix would look like if we actually had water in the environment down here, I guess. So this user now can change any setting they want. It's just that they get started with that default setting that we saw a moment ago. So let me go ahead and log this setting off now, and all of these things will be copied into their local user profile. Now let me show you one other quick little tip here. I've been showing you so far how you can configure a default user profile for one local computer. But what if I have that profile that I like and I want to apply it to all of my computers? Well, it's not practical to go to each individual desktop and copy an ideal profile setting to the default user profile setting on each local machine. So what I can do instead is to return to the system properties as the administrator here, where I was before, and go to the user profiles here again. Then I can go to this Phoenix User 01, but this time when I choose Copy To, I don't have to copy it to the local location. Instead, I can copy it to this location. I can go to the name of a profile server that I'm interested in, or actually it could be any domain controller. This can be any domain controller. And then I'll go to a share called sysvol, which contains common settings such as policy settings, contains scripts and the like. Then I'll go to the name of the domain, and then I'm going to go to scripts here, and then I'll click OK, and then I'm going to tack on to the end of this default user. And this will now create a domain default user profile. Again, I need to make sure that everyone can use it. And once I've done that and clicked OK, it'll copy that user's profile up to the domain default user account or the domain default user folder up there on a domain controller. Now, because of replication functionality, this default user profile will get copied also to all other domain controllers eventually throughout my organization. And anybody within this domain, when they log on, will now get that default user profile. Now then, offline, I reset the default user profile locally back to its verdant green meadow, bliss, wallpaper, and all of the other configuration settings that you're used to seeing with Windows XP. And the purpose for doing that is to log on as Phoenix User 04, where I've again made it a local user profile only. And then when I log this user on, we see that it's going to download its profile from the domain controller, which changes, as you can see, the interface there. It changes it to the silver color scheme, gives us our document and our shortcut, and all of the other things. This profile now came down from the default domain profile that's in that sysvol folder. Now let's return to the other topic of profiles, and that is the roaming user profiles. Remember for Phoenix User 01 here, for example, that I had blanked out the profile tab here under the profile path. Well, now if I want that to be a roaming profile so that they can get the same exact desktop settings no matter which computer they log on to, I'll enter in a profile path with the UNC path to DC Nugget 1, which is what I created in an earlier Nugget for the profiles directory that I created in an earlier Nugget, and then %user, sewer name, username %, and then now what will happen is it'll automatically fill in with their username. If I click apply even, for example, you'll see that it automatically fills in Phoenix User 01, and click OK. Now if I go to Windows Explorer, recall that it doesn't actually appear immediately. What has to happen here is when the user, Phoenix User 01, logs off for the first time after I've created their roaming user profile, then it will automatically copy the settings from their local profile to the server in the designated location that you saw there. And so logging on here, in fact, as Phoenix User 01 to this Windows XP computer, then once we load the settings here, we'll give it a moment to load, and then once it's all done, I'm going to log back off again. Having logged back off, we'll see for a moment here that it will copy those settings up to the roaming profile server. And after, when it's closing the network connections, it'll also say saving the settings, which you'll see momentarily here. That's when it's actually copying. There it is. That's when it's actually copying those settings up to the roaming profile server. And in fact, if I go to the file system on the server here, go to the data folder, or data drive, where I've created a profiles share, we see that now indeed it has created the Phoenix User 01 profile. If I double click on that, I see that it's populated that with all of the relevant profile information. Now, let me also show you something else here. If I right click on that folder for Phoenix User 01 and choose its properties, if I go to the security tab, notice that administrators have full control of this. Let me point out that that is not the default behavior. The reason why we see that here is because offline here in a previous time, I'd gone to the domain here on nuggetlab.com under Users and Computers, right-clicked and chose Properties. Then I went to a policy. Remember, group policy is how we can configure a lot of settings, everything from user desktop settings to security settings, computer behavior, all different kinds of things can be controlled. In fact, just about every part of the Windows operating system environment can be controlled through group policy. Now, I went to the default domain policy and I decided to edit that by clicking this button, which brought open the default domain policy in a group policy object editor. And then I went to administrative templates, and then there's a setting under system user profiles. And if I make this a little bit easier to read here, there we go. Then we went to the add the administrator security group to roaming user profile setting. I made that enabled, which we'll see if I double click on it. There's the enabled setting. Now, because of this setting that we see there, I am able to automatically add the administrators group to any of the roaming user profiles that get created here, and that's why I have the ability to go here and manipulate it. Might be useful because, especially if you have a very active organization that has maybe turnover with your users, then you might want to delete these profiles, because this will start to build up with, dozens or even hundreds of profiles that are never in use anymore, and you might want to prune those and get rid of those so they don't take up any disk space anymore. And it might also be useful for troubleshooting or other kinds of maintenance, the fact that we have now the administrator's security group on the security permissions for these profiles. Now let me also make a couple of miscellaneous notes about profiles here. Number one, with previous versions of Windows, particularly Windows NT 4, when you would have roaming profiles, the entire profile would always copy down to the local desktop when the user logged on. The entire profile will then copy up to the profile server when the user logged off. Now with Windows 2000 XP and 2003, that no longer happens. It's only the changes that will get copied back and forth. In other words, it synchronizes. And then the other thing to keep in mind as well is that only the settings that are part of the profile roam. There's a certain folder called local settings, which we won't see in the roaming profile because, as the name implies, it's only local. But if we go to the local file system under documents and settings for a given profile, for example, just this trainer account, notice that again, there's a hidden folder called local settings. It contains certain kinds of things. For example, it does contain application data. If I expand it, you see that there is application data there. This is kind of information that is only necessary to stay on the local hard drive for the local profile. There's also this application data that does roam. There's the history folder. That stays local, as well as any temp files that would be part of the profile, as well as temporary internet files. And that makes sense because temporary internet files are generally dynamic. Today they're one thing, tomorrow there will be something else. And this can build up to be quite large in terms of maybe even dozens of megabytes worth of stuff. And we don't want that to roam up and down. Now then, to just confirm what a roaming profile does, when I log off, remember it copies my settings up to the profile server. And then also if I log on to another computer, in this case, for example, client 02, the first time I log on to that client, it will download all the settings from my roaming profile directory. And then it copies them into my local profile on this client. And indeed, we see here that I am getting the exact same settings with the exception of the wallpaper, but I'm still getting my color scheme here and my files up here and my shortcuts. And then if I log off, it'll again synchronize with the profile server and the roaming profile up on that profile server. And the net effect of all this is, no matter where I go, no matter which machine I log on to, I'll always get those profile settings. Now, another thing you might want to do is to use a pre-configured group profile. And for example, I might have a series of users here, Phoenix user 10 through 20, that are my training user accounts, and I want them to have a specific desktop with specific shortcuts and files on that desktop. And that's for training purposes. Now, in order to point them all to the same exact profile, I'd have to right-click on them all and choose Properties after having selected them. Then go to the Profile tab, select the profile path, and enter in a path. So it might be DC91 Profiles Phoenix Profile. Click OK. Now, all of these user accounts have the same profile path that they point to, and here I've logged on one of those users, and we see what the desktop looks like. We've given them back the Windows XP Bliss desktop and all the common settings, but these are unique to these users' profile. They can have a company policies document right on the desktop that they have to read and understand. They have a welcome message from our company president, and so all of that stuff is there for them. And each user that logs on within that group of users will get the same profile. The problem is here, however, these users can also change the profile. What if a company user comes in here, they're a new employee, and they say, company policies. I never did believe in rules much. Let's just delete that. Delete? Yes. And welcome to our company from the company president. Yeah, I'm sure he welcomes us. Hit delete. Yes. And so then they just say, you know what, this is all kind of dumb. I'm not going to be here very long anyway. And in fact, with that attitude, they probably won't be here for very long. And then they just log off. Well, what's happened now is, as they log off, it saves their settings back up to the profile directory just the way it's supposed to, because it's a roaming profile. So that if we go to the desktop after this account finishes logging off here in a moment, then we'll see that on the desktop we've now lost those desktop icons, the shortcut and the actual file. So by double-clicking on desktop now, we see that we've lost those two items. Well, that's not going to be much good for my other users that have to be able to see that stuff. So what I'm going to do offline here is I'm going to put those back by taking them out of the recycle bin. And then I'm going to show you how you can lock down this desktop in what we call a mandatory profile. Now, making a profile a mandatory user profile is actually very simple. You can do it for a single user account. For example, even my Phoenix user 01 here, let's say they were misbehaving and they were doing something that the company didn't like for some reason. I could just change their ntuser.dat file to rename it, and it would be ntuser.man or ntuser.man for mandatory. Likewise, with my Phoenix profile, it's this shared profile that I don't want everybody messing with. I'll rename ntuser to ntuser.man, again, for mandatory. And then what I'll do is I'm going to reconnect here as my mischievous user, Phoenix user 10, and when they log back on again, they're going to try to remove the icons that I had put on there previously, and then we'll change wallpaper and some other things, and we'll see that the settings are not going to stick. And so here I've logged back on, as you see, as Phoenix user 10, and this is my mischievous user that say, this welcome message, that's going to go away. Maybe even this company policies. I'm not even going to put it in the recycle bin. I'm going to hold down Shift and delete, Yeah, let's get rid of the rules. Nobody likes rules. We'll choose some other kind of a wallpaper, and we'll just quickly go through a few of these things. We'll choose some other kind of a wallpaper. We'll choose this, whatever, moonflower. Ooh, boy, that's bright. And we'll just do, a couple of things. We'll change, whatever else we want to here. Then they say, I show those people. They're not going to tell me what kind of desktop to have. So then they log off, and when they log off, everything looks just fine. There's no indication that any of their settings are not going to stick. However, what we'll see happen is, because it was an ntuser.man file that was their renamed registry file instead of ntuser.dat, the next time that same user logs back on again, or any of the other users that access that same profile, they will not get the changes to that profile. In other words, that Phoenix User 10 account, they think they made changes, but when they come back into work tomorrow, what do they see? That the exact same thing that they have, that they're supposed to have in the mandatory profile, including this desktop wallpaper, and there's our files back. Now, mandatory user profiles have a lot of practical functionality. If you're in a public library where you don't want every user that sits down to customize the settings, you want to be able to fix it real quick by logging off and logging back on, excellent place for that to happen. Elementary schools or any kind of a school where kids have the innate ability to explore a lot and change a lot and destroy a lot, unfortunately. Matter of fact, I remember one time I was teaching a seminar, and a lady came up to me, and she was very overwrought with tension. You could just see it in her shoulders, man. And she was very uptight, and she says, I'm having more trouble with my users. I go in there, and they have obscene kinds of wallpaper, and they have all kinds of bad things that they've done to the desktop and everything, and it's making me very upset, and I don't know what to do about it. Well, then I told her just to rename the ntuser.dat file to ntuser.man to give them mandatory user profiles. And as she was walking away, I realized why she was so uptight about all this. She says, it wouldn't be so bad if it weren't for those inmates. Well, I guess she had more problems than just the desktop wallpaper there. But in any case, whether you have inmates or just normal users, the ntuser.dat to ntuser.man rename will help you to have mandatory profiles to prevent users from changing that profile, whether it's shared or it's individual. Now then, let's just quickly review what happens when we load profiles, just for clarity's sake. Number one, we start off with local profiles. With a local profile, the first time a user logs on, they get the default user profile, and it copies to whatever their name of their profile is under Documents and Settings. After that point, whenever they log on, it locates and logs on under their existing profile, again, under whatever the name of their user profile is under Documents and Settings. Then what can happen is, if you want to have a domain default user profile instead of using this default user profile, if you configure that and set that up in this sysvol directory under the scripts folder for default user, then users, instead of using the local default user, will go to the domain default user. Then when you move into roaming profiles, the first thing that will happen is if there's already a profile that exists for those users, it will still continue to use that profile, except that now, when they log off, it'll copy up to the location of their roaming user profile, and from thereafter, it will synchronize with that roaming profile. And then, if you have users that have mandatory profiles, all you have to do is to rename ntuser.dat to ntuser.man to make it mandatory. They will not be able to change any of their settings. Oh, they can change it while they're logged on, and it kind of plays mind games with them, I think, because they can change all the settings. They're pretty satisfied that they've been able to change everything. But the next time they log on again, it goes right back to the settings of the mandatory profile. Also, remember that there are pre-configured group profiles, which you commonly will probably want to make mandatory profiles because you don't want other people within that profile to change it and mess it up for everybody. In this nugget, we continued our discussion of user accounts as well as a look into profiles. We started by modifying multiple user accounts using Active Directory users in computers. And we see that there are multiple things we can do there that we haven't been able to do in the past. We also looked at how to add UPN suffixes or user principal name suffixes if you want to shorten, lengthen, or be more specific about the UPN suffixes that you have. We looked at user profiles, started off with look at local user profiles and saw where they're stored. We also looked at how we can change the default user profile locally or on a domain default user profile. Then we took a look at pre-configured group profiles, which is very handy if you have a series of users that all need to have that same profile. However, one of those users could make a change to it if they want, so we also discussed how to make a mandatory user profile. Mandatory user profiles are useful not only for a series of users as in a pre-configured group profile, but if you want to, you can even make a mandatory profile for a local user profile or for an individual user profile. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.